Man, this game has everything. It's all about celebrating rock and roll and EDM as the two genres get into a bare-knuckle brawl with each other. It's got big, multi-phase bosses that evolve over time. It's even a rhythm game. Sort of. No Straight Road's greatest weapon is its sheer variety. While at its core it's just a relatively simple brawler, NSR constantly throws anything and everything at the wall to see what sticks. But it's also a bit of a double-edged sword, because not everything sticks. And all that variety means that we've got a lot to cover today, so let's dive in. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today we're freeing Vinyl City one district at a time in No Straight Roads. Before we get too deep into the review, I did receive a free advanced review copy of this game, so heads up. No Straight Road's big conceit is that it's an action brawler where enemy attacks come at you in time to the music. Functionally, this doesn't actually change that much. The basic rhythm of combat is still the same as it ever was. It's just that attack cues are primarily audio and not visual now. But from this basic conceit springs literally everything else about this game, detailing the adventures of Mayday and Zook, two renegade punk rockers in an all-out war against the forces of electronic music for the fate of a city. Everything from set dressing details like the city getting electricity through the power of music to the theming behind each individual boss leaps from this basic inspiration. But at its most basic, these kids want to rock out, and these authoritarian old folks won't let them. No Straight Roads has a very Saturday morning cartoon rhythm to it. There's a new villain DJ every week, plenty of over-the-top cartoon hijinks in between, and every clash ends with Mayday and Zook's big signature finisher. Heck, they even have a catchphrase. Oh, I think they could have stood to workshop it a little bit.
And we're going to Junka, in their bunka. No, wait, it's
That's right, Zook! We're gonna bunka, we're gonna junka, and we're gonna bam in your faces!
Catchphrase aside, Mayday and Zook themselves make for a pretty solid pair. Mayday is the manic pixie revolutionary girl that's driving most of the conflict, while Zook plays straight man and carries most of the story's more complex and emotional stakes. They make for entertaining foils and believable friends, but they're at their most fun when bouncing off of a third party, namely, one of the game's boss fights. These bosses are NSR's beating heart, sprawling, multi-phase, 10-minute encounters filled with all kinds of unique mechanics and crazy visuals.
Hey, come on, man. I understand perfectly what you're trying to do. Or maybe not.
Seriously, each fight is so wildly different from the last, they hardly feel part of the same game even, and some of them have some pretty dang interesting twists. One later boss splits the party up into different encounters, one's basically an obstacle course that gets more complex every time you run through it, and one has you brawling with the boss's projectiles to get your own ammo to fire back at him. In each case, the real fun of these bosses isn't so much the core brawling action, which is pretty dead simple. It's all the wacky one-off mechanics each boss employs that you have to adjust to, as well as the music, character design, art direction, and even storyline of each fight. Each boss is supposed to represent an entirely different subgenre of music, and the game leans hard into that idea in every aspect of its design. And yes, you heard right. Each boss fight is so long that it gets its own self-contained storyline, complete with its own breaks for dialogue.
But I am real! As real as your love for each other.
Wait, what?
Whoa, hold on!
I can see it in your eyes. Your hearts are pounding like the beating drums of the ocean. Ba-bum?
Bubba?
It means follow your heart, Zook.
This game commits so damn hard to these segments, and I love it. Often, I even found that my favorite parts of these boss encounters was the banter and cutscenes between all the fighting. Part of this is because these sequences are just fantastically done, but part of it is also because of how the game handles difficulty. No Straight Roads forces you to go through its lowest difficulty first, which I have mixed feelings on. This game very much feels like it's aiming for an all-ages demographic, and in light of that, it's a sensible choice. And I'm sure the addition of an easier difficulty is a welcome one for some players, but for anyone looking for a new Fury, you're probably not going to find it here, and even if you do, get ready to spend your first 5 hours unlocking it. If you go back and replay old bosses, higher difficulties start forcing you to use the game's entire broad suite of mechanics, especially parrying, but the game's lowest difficulty barely even touches on some of these concepts. And for the bulk of my time with this game, the boss fight's individual aesthetics is what came through strongest. This extends to most of the rest of the game as well. No Straight Roads is a game with a lot of stuff. The boss fights are great, but almost every fight has less inspired segments preceding them where you punch your way through a bunch of mooks, and then there's a bunch of little city exploration segments, and rap battles with a whole different set of mechanics, and a base that expands over the course of the game, and these random DJ interviews, and an XP system where you can get new skills, and a system of special abilities you can equip, and stickers you can apply to your equipment for temporary boosts. It just goes on and on. The manic level of variety serves the boss fights extremely well, but outside of them, that same variety is more of a distraction from No Straight Road's otherwise excellent core. And there are a few through lines with most of these mechanics. The first and more unfortunate one is that while NSR introduces a wide variety of activities, they're almost all universally shallow. The big one, city exploration, is just a really basic Easter egg hunt that mostly exists to pad the game out. I remember in particular this one door I had to wait 4 hours to unlock, and when I did it, what I found on the other side was... Yep, a barren room with a throwaway object to inspect. Likewise, Zook gets a whole combo system that's supposed to make him this more technical character and differentiate him from Mayday, but he only gets 3 attacks to combo between, and 2 of them require meters, so I found myself mostly mashing out his auto attack over and over, exactly like I did on Mayday. Then there are all these NPCs I can talk to, but they almost never have anything to actually contribute.
Ah.
Ingenious.
It's a different take from home.
Indeed. Indeed.
I could keep going with examples, but the thing is, it doesn't have to be this way, because there are specific side diversions that do work on every single level. The rap battles, for example, are an absolute blast. Mechanically, they're basically reverse Guitar Hero tracks where you have to avoid obstacles coming down the frets, but aesthetically and narratively, they really knock these out of the park. These battles show off an entire subplot with Zook and his brother hashing out all their highly personal beef, and the battle itself plays out at a really satisfying rhythm. And that's the other through line. No Straight Roads can be a little uneven with its constant side diversions, but even in its weakest moments, this game has a killer aesthetic and a heck of a lot of heart that it wears right on its sleeve. Probably as it should as a game about a bunch of loud rock and rolling revolutionaries. And when it does all come together, well, that's when you get those boss fights, and all that dithering about in the overworld and combat with random mobs starts feeling worth it. But while we're on that topic, let's get to the big question. What do you get out of 5 hours with No Straight Roads? Personally, I made it through 5 of what I presume to be 6 of the game's major boss encounters, so I'm actually pretty close to the end. But I also wasted a lot of time following up on every side activity and doubled back to unlock some harder difficulties for some boss fights. But depending on what you're looking for, I think there are 2 ways you can try to tackle this game. If you just want the story and some cartoon hijinks, blast straight through that narrative and don't bother with all the side mechanics. You won't need the rewards from them to finish a game anyway. Do that and you'll polish the game off in probably around 5 hours, but I think you'll be missing out on a lot of what NSR is going for. Progression systems continue on well past the point when you beat the game, and it's almost begging for a Diablo-style treatment where you replay the game over and over on higher difficulties. If you're looking to see what NSR actually has to offer on a mechanical level, this is the way you're going to have to go, but thankfully you don't have to wait to beat the entire game before you can start unlocking stiffer challenges a la carte. And all of that is without getting into the fact that No Straight Roads can and probably should be played in co-op, which radically alters the game. Playing in the age of COVID, before the game's even been released, I didn't have that luxury, but this game was clearly designed for 2 players first and foremost. Even in single player, there are some sections that were clearly designed for 2 different people controlling their own characters, and the best solution the developers could find was just to make you control both characters at the same time. But even beyond that disclaimer, there's a lot of really fantastic stuff to enjoy in No Straight Roads. It's just a shame that it's all buried under a lot of padding or gated behind unlockable difficulties. Ultimately, I think this game is most worth it if you have an interest in its story. If you're just here for the gameplay, there are definitely more compelling options out there with tighter controls, less fluff, and more interesting and complicated fights. But in terms of variety, aesthetic design, and sheer passion, No Straight Roads is an unquestionable success. And if you're down to clown in its cartoon world for a little bit, you'll probably have some fun. Hey guys, if you like what you're seeing here, consider supporting me on Patreon. With your generous support, I can start doing all kinds of cool stuff like more in-depth video essays and 5-hour streams where I review games like this in real time. So if any of that sounds cool, please consider becoming a patron today. But I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.